podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to a new podcast, The Paddock and The Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
I hope you enjoyed the first episode of The Paddock and The Pavilion. Today's guest is Roland Butcher, the former Middlesex and England cricketer of the 1970s and 1980s. I caught up with Roland in Barbados, unfortunately only via Skype, to discuss his career, firsts and favourites. Enjoy the programme, which can be downloaded on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher and Spotify. I'm delighted today to welcome to the Pavilion Roland Butcher, the first black cricketer to play cricket for England. It seems a long while since you spoke at the March cricket dinner back in 2004, Roland.
Yes, Stephen, it's a great pleasure to be with you. And yes, 2004, many years ago.
Yeah. How are you anyway?
Absolutely fantastic. Obviously in Barbados now for the last 16 years. Weather's great, but like everyone else, the last 3 or 4 months have been quite tough for everybody with this COVID-19. But apart from that, fine.
So what things are you up to now?
Well, I have just actually, the end of this month will be a year that I retired from the University of the West Indies. I was at the university for 15 years as director of sports, and the last 4 or 5 years as head coach of the Academy of Sport. So I retired July 31st last year. Right now, pretty busy with my other commitments. I'm a director of the Barbados Cricket Association, also on the West Indies Cricket Committee, and chairman of the Everton Week Centre of Excellence, and then I have some other committees that I'm on, like scholarships and placements and cricket development as well. So I'm busy.
Oh, the Everton Week, so it must have been a very sad day for you when Everton passed away recently.
Yeah, absolutely, because Everton was a very close friend. And when I say close, I mean he only lived about 500 metres from where I do, so we saw each other quite often. But, you know, we were close friends over a long period, even from the time I was in England. So it was a sad loss. Great player, but also a great man as well.
And of course, you're related as well to Basil Butcher, who played Test cricket for the West Indies.
Yes, and unfortunately, early in the year, he passed away. I actually went to his funeral in Ghana, and again, that was a sad occasion too, because, you know, not just being a family member, but, you know, another great West Indian player gone at this time.
Now, when did you first start playing cricket?
Well, that's a very good question. As far as I can remember, I mean, being a little boy, you know, maybe 6 or 7, I'm sure that I was running around trying to play most of the time, certainly until I went to England when I was 13 and a half. Most of the cricket would have been pretty informal in terms of typical playground type of sport where everybody gets together and play and make their own rules, etc., etc. So limited organised cricket. Probably I'd only played a few games for the school, my primary school, but generally most of my cricket was informal cricket.
And when you came to the UK, I read somewhere that you were playing football before you were playing cricket.
Yes, because coming to a new environment like the UK, where everyone is playing football, naturally, you know, children tend to adapt quite well. So I adapted to playing football, and yes, it was through playing football that I got asked to take part in a cricket game.
This was at Stevenage.
Yes, in Stevenage, yeah. I mean, just basically our normal weekend as kids would be to go to the local park and play football 2 or 3 hours. And on this particular Sunday, as we were about to finish to go back home, some guys came onto the field and put some stumps up on the pitch, and then came over to our group and asked if any of us would like to play because they were short of players. Most of us said, no, of course not, we're not interested. We've been here for 3 hours, want to get home and watch football on the TV. But, you know, one of my friends who, you know, we had spoke about cricket before said, you like the game, why don't you play? So he really persuaded me in the end to play, and it all started from there.
And you were playing for Stevenage first 11, I read, by the time you were 15.
Yes, very quickly, this team that actually asked us to play at the time was Stevenage third 11. So having played there, I gravitated quite quickly to the second 11 and then into the first 11, as you said, probably by the time I was 15.
And then you then joined the MCC Young Cricketers, is that right? That 1970?
Yeah, there's a bit of a gap before then.
Yeah.
One of the guys at the club, a gentleman by the name of Cyril Hammond, who was one of the players, he was also a football manager as well. He was moving from Stevenage to take up a job in Gloucestershire as chief fundraiser for the club. And while he was there, he recommended me as a young talent to the club. They invited me down for trials, and for 2 years I would go down every summer, spend the entire summer playing for the Gloucestershire youth team. So it was after that Gloucestershire sent me up to Lords for a trial for the MCC Young Professionals.
Because I wondered why you played for Gloucestershire second 11. It's one of the questions I was going to ask you, because I looked up on Cricket Archive and found your first game for their second 11 in July 1971, when you must have been 18, is that?
71, yeah. I would have been.
17.
I was 17. That would have been my second year at MCC Young Professionals.
And you played a game against Northants. This was which featured Sarfraz was playing in this game, who already then was a test player for the Pakistan side. And you got 3 and 15 in that game.
Yeah, well, not a illustrious start.
But then you started playing for Middlesex seconds then, and obviously then on to the first team at Middlesex.
Yeah, I was with the MCC Young Professionals 1970-71. I got offered a contract by Middlesex for the 72 season, so I joined Middlesex in 1972.
And I reading your first class match was on the 22nd of June 1974 against Yorkshire at Middlesbrough.
Middlesbrough, yes.
Yeah. The Yorkshire side was captained by Geoffrey Boycott. Middlesex side captained by Mike Brearley, but was still included the old timers Fred Titmus and John Murray.
That's right.
And on that day you batted number 6 and you were caught Hutton, that's Richard Hutton, bowled Jeff Cope for a duck.
Yes, it was an absolute nightmare pitch. Jeff Cope and Fred Titmus got nearly all the wickets. I think Titmus got 14 or 15 in the game, and Cope got 7 or 8 as well. So it was an awful pitch. Norman Featherstone batted really well. I think he got 100 on it, and we actually won, and I didn't have to bat in the second innings, thank God.
No, you won by an innings, yes. And so it dates you because to an extent, because Fred Titmus, I mean, he got 7 wickets in the second innings. He played in the 1940s, so.
Yeah, I think Fred spanned about 4 or 5 decades.
That's right. And then I noticed that winter you actually went back to Barbados, because I found a game you played for them against Jamaica. When you opened the batting, the Barbados team included people like Collis King, Van Holder and Keith Boyce. And Michael Holding was playing against you and opened the bowling for Jamaica. Yes,
absolutely. That was played in Montego Bay. I think Jeffrey Dujon played as well. That was the very first class match they've ever had in Montego Bay. And yes, Michael Holding played in that.
Was that the first time you'd faced Michael Holding? No?
Well, yes, it was. I mean, he was only young like all of us. I mean, he was he was not recognised at that stage.
Yeah, and moving on, I found your first class century, which was, I think, probably a bank holiday weekend in 1978 in August.
Against, of course.
Against Gloucestershire, yeah.
Yes.
Bristol. Well,
Bristol.
Proctorshire,
yes,
as they were called in those days. But and Mike Selby was captain of the Middlesex side. Probably Mike Brearley was involved in a test match on that day.
Yes, that was Bristol. I think Mike Proctor played in that game for Gloucestershire. Yes, it was ironic that I would get my first class 100 against Gloucestershire. I don't think they've ever forgiven me really for obviously 1 going to Middlesex and 2 scoring my first 100 against them. And subsequently to that, I got quite a few hundreds against them.
Oh, they were one of your favourite sides, were they, to play against?
Well, I mean, I don't know why, because as I said, I had very fond memories of my time at Gloucestershire as a youth player. I played in the same team as Andy Stovall and David Graveney, and Jeff Howarth, the New Zealand player, was our captain at the time. And at the club at that time, there was a young Zahir Abbas and Sadiq Mohammed. So, I played a lot of those young guys who eventually came on to be, Gloucestershire regular players. So I had a lot of affiliation with the club, and I still think a lot about the club because I think they did a lot for me. That's
good. And scored 142 that day. Did that innings make a lot of difference to you after scoring your first century?
Absolutely. You'll always remember the very first 100 that you scored at first class cricket, and I certainly remembered it. I think to this day I can still have fond memories of it, because it was number one, my first, and it was also against a very good bowling attack, and in their backyard as well. So it was very satisfying.
Did you know Viv Richards scored his first century in first-class cricket when he scored 102 for Somerset against Gloucestershire in May 1974?
Now, you were renowned as a brilliant fielder and attacking middle-order batsman, and then you were picked for the England one-day international side against Australia, a game that took place on the 22nd of August 1980 at Edgbaston. What do you remember about that game?
Again, fond memories of that game. I was obviously selected. It was a two-match series against Australia. Two Butchers were actually selected. There were myself and Roland Butcher from Surrey. We were selected in the squad. The first game, Alan played in the first game. I didn't play in the first game. Second game was at Edgbaston. I played and he sat out. What I remember about the game is it was a very high-scoring game. Excellent.
Yeah, England got 320.
Yes, absolutely. Boycott, Gooch. I think Bilathi got a half century. I got a half century. As I said, we got over 300. Australia replied, got very close. I think Kim Hughes got 100 or so against a good Australian attack of Lily Thompson, Pascoe, and other players like Greg Chappell, Ray Bright, etc., etc. So it was a good side, and the important thing was, we came up as winners on a very entertaining day. So really, for me, it was really delight. I enjoyed that day, even to this day when I think about it, because everything just went right on that day. It was a lovely day, big crowd, good pitch, played with some fantastic players, and of course we won.
And you scored 52 in 38 balls, which in those days was going some. Yes,
in those days. I mean, I found out afterwards that it was actually it became the fastest 50 in international cricket in ODI. So that was nice to certainly have that in your first game.
Now, that season in 1980, Middlesex won the championship and also the NatWest Trophy, where you scored a half century in the final against Surrey. And after that, you were selected to go on the tour of the West Indies. How did you find out you'd been selected?
Yeah, you're right. That season was a very good one for the club. As you said, we did the double, and obviously I got selected for the ODI. Was a little bit disappointed not getting selected for the centenary test. Remember, the centenary test was played that same year, so I was a bit disappointed not to be selected there. But the season finished. I went off to Canada to my cousins with my wife on a vacation, and was tracked down in Canada to tell me I'd been selected to go on the tour of the West Indies. So that's
was
how
it
I found
by
out.
Telephone call? Telephone call. Somehow
a reporter managed to track me down. How he did, I have no idea, because I left no forwarding address as to where I was going, where I was staying, but somehow they managed to find me and give me the good news.
Because in those days you heard of people finding out through CFAX and things like that, didn't you? So at least you got a phone call. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was from a reporter. That was not from an administrator. I guess with my ODI call-up, I mean, that was slightly strange as well, because the day that it was actually announced, I was at Lord's. We were practicing at Lord's, Middlesex as usual, and when we finished practice, I think I was getting ready to go home or something when I got a call from my wife asking me if I'd been selected for England. I said, no, I have heard nothing about that. And then she informed me that her boss had said he'd heard something on the news. I got home in the evening. My father called to ask the same question. I said, well, I have no idea. Nobody's told me anything. And it was not until about 9 o'clock in the evening when the news was on the TV that I saw the team announced. That was the first that I actually knew that I had been selected.
Oh, so you found out by television. Yeah. So the tour of the West Indies in 1981 was quite a traumatic tour for other reasons, but you made your first test appearance in the third test because the second test had been called off because of the Robin Jackman affair in Guyana. Had you been selected for that test, or did they actually select a side? Or?
Well, I think I would have played in that test because the first test in Trinidad I didn't play. We went to Ghana. We actually did play an ODI in Ghana, which I played in the ODI. And I was in line to play the test match as well. Obviously, because of what took place, the test was cancelled, which meant we had to move on to Barbados, which became the third test. So, I actually was picked for that as it worked out. I think it was nice to have played that first test in the place of my birth amongst my family and friends, etc. But it also would have been nice to have made a debut in Ghana because in Ghana at that time the pitch at Border was one of the greatest batting pitches in the world. So it would have been nice to have perhaps played on a surface like that.
So what did it feel like playing in Barbados and being in the dressing room with Geoffrey Boycott? Ian Botham was captain. David Gower.
Well, when I say I didn't feel anywhere, don't forget, I had played a lot of years with those guys before. Ian Botham was on the MCC Young Pros professionals side with me at the same time. We were there at the same time. 1970 he came. We were there for those 2 years. So, I had known him since then. Obviously, we'd played against each other. Similarly with Boycott and Gooch and others, obviously we had played against each other for many years. So, and obviously in the same ODI team, my first one international, all of those players were in the same team. So it didn't really make a big difference being in the dressing room because I had known all those players and they knew me as well.
And did it, at the time, being the first black cricketer, did it sort of make any difference to you? Was there that much publicity at the time?
Yeah, there was massive publicity. The publicity really started, way back in September, October time when the team was selected. But as the months went by, it was intensified. And obviously right throughout the series in the Caribbean, it was at fever pitch in literally every island where we went. So, yeah, it was a big deal for the Caribbean. Obviously the first time a black West Indian had been selected for England. Obviously, they were very proud of my achievements. Naturally, they wanted the West Indies to win, but they would have liked for me to have been a success, but England lose. So I think generally around the Caribbean, it was very well received, and in every place that I went, I certainly was, I got some very good receptions.
Good. And you were, at a time, of course, the West Indies were one of the best side in the world, and probably at their peak, really. You look down the bowling attack they had for the games you played in. It was Roberts, Holding, Croft and Garner, and then a young Malcolm Marshall in the wings. So you couldn't have had an easy attack to get runs against, could you?
Absolutely. There was a simple reason why they were the best. They did have that 4 or 5 prong pace attack. Malcolm Marshall actually played in the last Test match in Jamaica. So they're a very formidable side, and backed up with some quality batsmen, Winnington, Haynes, Richards, Lloyd, Gomes, so they had a very well balanced team, and there was a simple reason why they ruled cricket in the world, because they had a lot of talented players performing at the top of their game. So it was a tough series, but I think England also had perhaps one of their best sides ever too, because when you've got a team with Gooch, Boycott, Gower, your first 3 players who've all scored over 8,000 Test runs. You had Gattin, you had Mike Gattin in the squad. You Bob Willis, Paul Downton, Graham Dilley, John Embry, Peter Willey. England had a very strong team. I don't think Ian Botham, of course. I don't think since England would have had a team with the likes of those players for sure.
Well, in that game, the West Indies, they got 265. We replied with 122. And batting at number 5, you got 17. You were Court Richards bowled Colin Croft.
Yeah.
But that particular test was also the game where the Michael Holding over to Geoffrey Boycott when he was bowled off the 6th ball. Yeah. Yeah,
that was that. Yeah, the very first over of our innings, actually, it was. And yeah, it was a pretty torrid one for Jeffrey. As you said, the final delivery, he was out of the final delivery.
That's right. And so the West Indies went on to win the game by an innings and 298 runs. And then you played the fourth and fifth tests at Antigua and Jamaica. And you also played the 2 one-day internationals on the tour. So what were your reflections on the tour at the end?
I think before I go on to the reflection, you must also remember that during my first test in Barbados, our assistant manager, Ken Barrington, died as well. So, he had a heart attack and died overnight. So I think that was around the second day. So that was you could imagine what should have been a great homecoming for me was saddened by that as well. But I think something like that really took the wind out of most of us, because it was very difficult for everybody to continue playing the game of cricket with the same sort of intensity when, a member of your team had, passed away. I can't remember at any time where that would have happened on the tour, where a part of the management, had passed away, and then you're expected to continue and perform against the best team in the world. So it was extremely difficult. I think overall, I thought, we did pretty well. I mean, I think the series was 2-0 against a side like that. To lose only 2-0 in against like that, and the backbone of what happened after, in the middle of this, which would have been the second test that was played. Then they had to play 2 more after that. I thought, England did really well to finish that series, and Gooch and Gower also did exceptionally well, along with Peter Willey. So overall, that was a tough tour for us, not just cricket-wise, but I think emotionally as well. It was very tough.
Yeah, I mean, a tough baptism for yourself, and you must have hoped after that to taste Test cricket and international cricket again.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you get a taste, and obviously you want more. It wasn't to be at that time.
I mean, I think if nowadays people would easily be given more than 3 matches in a Test career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, against that type of opposition in their backyard, and obviously the things that happened on that tour with it, the cancellation of a Test match, and a teammate like Jackman being asked to leave the country and you having to leave as well. Then the Ken Barrington affair, and then you're playing against the best in the world. There's a lot there to be taken into consideration. Obviously, the selectors, didn't feel that was the case, and lots of changes were made in 1981.
Now you're a star player for Middlesex, who were myself a Middlesex supporter, and they won the NatWest Trophy in 80, 84 and 88. They won the Benson Hedges couple of times, and also the County Championship, won it 1980, 1982, 85 and 1990. And so you scored 1,000 runs in 84, 85 and 86. But you suffered a quite serious injury in 1983. Yes,
that was, the timing for that was pretty bad actually, because I felt really back to my best, and probably better than my best at that point, because the winter of 82, I spent in Australia as the overseas player for Tasmania. Myself and Michael Holden were the 2 overseas players. And I had a relatively good year, but for sure, my game had improved immensely in Australia. Came back with lots of optimism. I remember start of the 83 season was a very wet season. Lots of days not playing, and by July, I think we'd only played about 6 weeks of cricket. But in that 6 weeks, I certainly made the most of that. At that point, I had about 700 runs in the 6 weeks. I'd taken 36 catches, and it was in very good form. And it really felt as if, I would make it back into the England side that year. But then that afternoon in July, I missed a short ball, hooked at a short ball a little bit early, was struck under the left eye, had multiple fractures, end of season there. And what I didn't really realize at the time, which you never do, was, you found out really that it was the end of your international career, because as a result of that injury that I sustained, I lost some vision in the left eye. So if you're going to play at the highest level against the best, you have to be, certainly your eyesight has to be spot on. And really that hampered me, because I came back probably in June the following year. I got back into the cricket, but I had to make lots of changes in terms of head position and to compensate for the loss of sight in the left eye, which is the leading eye, etc. So it really hampered my career. And I think I probably knew at that time that because the sight was not going to get any better, I had 2 or 3 operations. The surgeons basically said, look, we can put some silicone at the back of the eye to bring the eye forward. They said it may make good difference to your vision. It may not. I felt it was too much of a risk, and I said, no, I don't want any silicone at the back of my eye. So I just had to fight through to try and adjust the sight, but it was never the same again. Not because of the injury, because I was never afraid of fast bowling, but I think in terms of the sharpness of sight, that was a real issue.
You certainly had a successful county career with Middlesex, though, in a very powerful side.
Absolutely. Following that injury, thank God I was still able to continue and play another 7 years professionally. So, I was still good enough to play at the first class level. And as you said, yes, we were extremely successful during my period at Middlesex. And, I retired at the end of 90. And as you said, again, we'd won the championship that year. So I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Middlesex, and fantastic team, great players, good leader, and, a good club to be playing for.
And did you retire at the right time then, at the end of 1990?
At the time, I thought I was perhaps doing the right thing. A couple of years later, I probably thought, maybe I could have gone on, especially when I saw Graham Gooch and others go on into their 40s. I could have carried on, because I think physically, I was always very fit, so there was no issues in terms of fitness. I think in my situation, it probably was a hasty decision, because I still had another year of my contract left. My current contract didn't expire until the end of 1991. I think what hastened my decision to retire was the fact that 1989 was my benefit year, which meant
work and a benefit,
yeah, which meant obviously you would have started working from the previous year. You work all through 1989, then played all 1990. So I think I was physically and mentally tired. Really, what I should have done, thinking back, was perhaps I should have just taken the entire winter away from any form of cricket, etc., and come back in 1991 afresh. But instead, obviously, I made a decision which I felt a year or two later that I'd made the wrong decision.
And then you had a year playing. I've got to get this in, because you had a year playing minor county cricket for Suffolk, and in your first game you played against Cambridgeshire. So I thought I'd got to get that in. This was for Suffolk against Cambridgeshire at Bury St Edmunds, when those two Cambridgeshire stalwarts, Stuart Turner and J.K. Lever, were both playing for Cambridgeshire, and you got 0 in the first innings and 1 in the second innings. But
that was not a great game. I think minor counties I found quite hard, because not having the same intensity as first class cricket, and first class cricket, you're in a structure where there's regular practice, etc. I was living in Buckinghamshire, so my time was fairly limited to get up to Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. So it was difficult for me, because I was a person right throughout my career who enjoyed training and practice. For me, I had to train and practice so that I would be okay during the games. So some people find it okay not to practice, but I certainly don't, and didn't at the time. So it was tough for me, and I think perhaps I was, my mind probably was not as focused as it should have been.
And then after retirement, I've read so many different things that you've done, one of which was doing your UEFA B coaching badge with Brendan Rodgers as well.
Absolutely. I was I was, after I finished playing, I had been coaching doing coaching qualifications before that, but I then decided, perhaps to try and, look at a football career. So I did my UEFA coaching license, met Brendan Rodgers, who was doing his at the same time on that course. We got on very well. He was a young man who retired very early from the game. As you know, he was Irish under-21 international, sustained some injuries, and very early decided that he wanted to be a coach. So we, over the 3 months, we got on really well, had similar ideas, discussed lots about coaching, etc. And following that, sometime later, he was appointed as academy director at Reading. Much to my surprise, one day I got a phone call, and it was Brendan telling me he'd been appointed academy director and he would like me to come and work with him. So I said yes, and I went to Reading as an academy coach, ran my own team, and worked with him there for a while.
And you also did some schools coaching at Arsenal.
Yes, I mean, that was obviously part that even throughout my cricket career, I was doing that for about 10 years. I was a soccer school coach for Arsenal. That was very enjoyable, and one of my very good friends is actually Alan Sefton. He's still there. He's been at Arsenal for well over 30 years. Very close friend of mine. He was one who was pushing me a lot to keep taking my qualifications, etc. From those Arsenal days, and it was a great time being at Arsenal there to see. It was during the time, obviously, when they were extremely successful and had some fantastic players. So, yeah, that was a great period of my time.
Being an Arsenal fan myself, I'd like to see us be a bit more successful at the moment, but we can't have everything.
Absolutely.
You also you coached Bermuda at cricket?
Yes. Well, what happened was, Brendan was, as you said, was at obviously Reading. Jose Mourinho was at Chelsea and was very impressed with him. So Mourinho took him to Chelsea, and from that point is when I then went back to cricket. I took the position in Bermuda as national coach, and really that was a separation from football at that point.
Oh, so Jose Mourinho had an effect on your actual career then as well.
Well, he had an effect on Brenda's as well.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. Now, moving just on to our favourites round.
Let's find out Roland's favourites.
Just a few questions about favourite things of yours. The first question is, what your favourite ever days cricket?
My favourite ever days cricket, I would have to say, would be I would say that ODI against Australia at Edgbaston in 1980.
And your favourite batsman and why?
Favourite batsman, without doubt, Viv Richards. Not just a great player, but everything about him, his demeanour, his confidence, his shot making, the ability to change games, fantastic fielder, catcher, very confident in everything he did. So for me, really, he was the complete player that I admired.
Yeah, and he got 100 in that first test you played in as well. Your favourite bowler?
Favourite bowler of all time, I would have to say, I'll have to split that into two actually, whether it's a fast bowler and spin bowlers. I would say in terms of fast bowling, I would say Malcolm Marshall, and I think spin bowling for me, tight between Warne and Muratharan, I think. Two magicians. I wouldn't like to separate them. I would like them both in my team. One ball on either end. So I would have to twin the two of those together. Warne and Muratharan, and Marshall is a fast bowler.
You're a fast bowler. And your favourite captain? You played under two at Middlesex who were very successful.
Yeah, for me, Mike Braley. For him, because I think what Mike Braley was able to do, particularly with young players, because when he took over, all of us came into the side as young players, but he was able to mold all of us by getting us involved from a very young age. It was not the old pro situation that would have pertained before, where the youngsters had to sit in the corner and not be heard. No, he was the sort of captain that would involve you very much in what was going on, and in many ways he would put the youngster on the spot. Even in the middle of a game, he would walk up to you, whether it was your first game or second game or whatever, and he would say to you things like, Roland, who do you think should bowl at the other end when Daniel's finish? Or what field do you think we should have for Jeff Boycott, etc. So, he was always testing you. And what it did was it kept you very sharp, because, even if you were caught out the first time, you would be on your guard after that. You would make sure that it would never happen again. So, for me, he certainly was the best captain. I think Mike Gatting was was a good captain, but in a different way. Mike Gatting was a person who liked to lead from the front and for people to follow. So, two totally different captains, but for me, Brady was the one that I think I learned the most on.
What about your favourite ground?
Favourite ground, Lords, no question about that. It's, I guess, you can become a little bit too familiar, having played 20 years there. But, on a big day, I don't think there was anywhere else to play but Lords. If you play in a final or anything like that, for me, that's the best.
And your favourite other sport? I think I can guess that one.
Doesn't take a lot of working out. I think football for me, definitely. I mean, I love other sports as well. I mean, I'm keen track and field and boxing, etc. But I think football for me is another special sport along with cricket.
And you played a bit of semi-pro for Stevenage and Biggleswade, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. In Stevenage, yeah. I mean, actually, I was the first black player to play for Stevenage. I mean, you will see that in a new book that's coming out next month called Britain's Black Football Pioneers. And you will see that in there, where that book chronicles the exploits of the first black player to play for every single league club in England, all 92 clubs. So there's chapters on each of those. Yes, so I played for Stevenage.
What's that during when you were still playing cricket for Middlesex in the winter, was it? Yeah. That
was in the early days. Yeah, that was in the early days. I also played for Biggleswade under the gentleman I spoke to you about before, Cyril Hammond. Cyril Hammond, who was the captain, also the cricket at Stevenage. He was also a football manager, and again, as I said, he was the one who took me to Gloucestershire. So I played under him at Biggleswade.
So you owe a lot to him then, don't you? Yeah.
Absolutely, to him and his family, because not just did he got me the opportunity to go there, but in the summers, I spent the entire summers with him and his family. I stayed with him. They did everything for me: cook, clean, wash, everything for those. I owe him a great deal of gratitude.
That sounds like a good book to look out for as well, if it's coming out this year.
Yeah, it is. It's, as I said, it'll be out in August, and it will be good reading.
So what does the future hold for Roland Butcher?
Well, for me right now, what I've done recently, I've published a football coaching manual, which is out, and really trying to assist the football in the Caribbean, trying to see whether we can develop the players to the level where we can actually see them performing on the international stage. Right now, the Caribbean loves football. There are more people who love football than any other sport in the Caribbean, and play as well. But right now, they're mere spectators, just really watching all the great players in the international leagues. For me, I want to see when you turn on your TV that you identify in the English Premier League, he's from Barbados, in La Liga, Serie A, Bundesliga, or Jamaica or Trinidad or whatever. Those are the sort of things I want to see. So this manual really is aimed at putting a developmental structure in place, to assist the coaches and players in this region. So right now, that's something I'm working very hard on. It's got very good reviews so far, and I'm looking forward to doing some more work with that.
Well, best of luck with that, and thank you very much for joining me in the pavilion and being on the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Stephen, it's a great pleasure, and it's been good talking to you. And
thank you.
Anytime in the future that you need my assistance, I'm only too happy to oblige.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Paddock and the Pavilion. You can download the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud and Stitcher, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at the Pad and Pav.
Sports Social Podcast Network.